Welcome to Galactic Atlas Lore. If you enjoy these tales, please like and subscribe. If you have any recommendations you would like me to explore, please leave a comment. Let's begin. Corellia, Heart of the Hyperlanes. Chapter 1. The Birth of the Corellian Sector. From celestial myths to hyperspace mastery. In the vast sprawl of the galaxy, where countless stars shimmer with the stories of ancient civilizations and forgotten empires, few systems shine as brightly as the Corellian sector. Revered as a cornerstone of galactic infrastructure and exploration, Corellia is often celebrated for its shipyards, its iconic smugglers, and its fierce cultural identity. Yet to truly understand the world of Corellia, and by extension its indelible impact on galactic history, one must go back further than the Old Republic, beyond the rise and fall of empires, and deep into the mythic twilight of the galaxy's creation. Here lies a story not of governments or armies, but of cosmic artisans and ancient forces, the enigmatic beings known only as the Celestials. According to scattered fragments preserved in deep hyperspace records, obscure Jedi texts, and the oral traditions of non-human Corellian species, the Corellian system was not born through the typical chaos of cosmic evolution. Rather, it was constructed. The legend of the Celestials, also referred to in some archaic databanks as the Architects or the Ancients, tells of an impossibly advanced species that manipulated the very fabric of reality, creating and aligning stars, planets, and even entire hyperspace corridors with purpose and precision. The Corellian system, with its mathematically perfect orbital balance and the suspicious proximity of 5 habitable worlds within a single gravity well, has long been held as evidence of such tampering. The idea that planets like Corellia, Talos, Tralus, Dral, and Selonia were once celestial marbles arranged by godlike beings is a story that endures in the minds of philosophers, historians, and Corellians themselves, who often describe their homeland not as born, but forged. Corellia, the system's heart, was the crown jewel of this supposed construction. A temperate, resource-rich world, with oceans as deep as its legends, and continents carved with ancient energy lines whose purposes are still debated. Surrounding it, Talos and Tralus formed a binary planet pair, orbiting each other in a gravitational dance that defied astrophysical norms. Selonia and Dral, each with their own moons and distinct climates, completed the family of 5, often referred to as the 5 brothers, though the term is used more as poetic shorthand than strict gendered classification. Even today, scientists struggle to explain how these planets remain so closely bound without catastrophic orbital decay, lending further credibility to the myth that someone set them into motion deliberately. Yet beyond the celestial symmetry and theoretical speculation lies a more tangible history, one of early civilizations, interplanetary diplomacy, and the kindling of unity through difference. Among the first known intelligent species of the sector were the Dral and the Selonians, both emerging from their respective homeworlds tens of thousands of years before Corellia's human population rose to dominance. The Dral, small, fur-covered and deeply contemplative, built societies grounded in knowledge, record-keeping, and non-violence. Their love for logic and careful governance made them natural historians and early interstellar mediators. They crafted some of the earliest planetary archives in the sector, many of which are still consulted by galactic scholars today, and viewed the universe not as something to dominate, but to understand. In stark contrast, the Selonians were tall, burly, and hive-minded beings of action, tradition, and ritualistic strength. Emerging from subterranean warrens, their culture emphasized loyalty to matriarchs, physical discipline, and a deep spiritual connection to the soil and stone of their home. Although often misrepresented by outsiders as rigid or primitive, Selonians cultivated an incredibly nuanced code of honor and social governance, in which every member of a warren held a defined role. Their society was one of equilibrium through purpose, and despite their martial strength, they rarely pursued war beyond the defense of their territories and customs. These two civilizations eventually made contact, not through conquest, but through the early development of interplanetary communication and rudimentary space travel. Long before Corellia's humans charted hyperspace, the Dral and Silonians were navigating intra-Cetan space using primitive fusion drives and magnetospheric sails. Their early pacts, recorded in stone, crystal, and sonic tablets, established the foundation of what would one day become Corellia's unique cultural identity, a balance between the cerebral and the physical, the individual and the collective, the ancient and the aspiring. In many ways, these early alliances would shape Corellia's future political mechanisms far more than any single government ever could. It was not until many millennia later that humans, believed to be transplanted to Corellia from Coruscant or another core world by ancient hyperspace migrations, rose to prominence. While the exact origin remains unclear, by the time of the early Republic, human settlements had spread across Corellia and its orbital habitats, rapidly developing into industrial powerhouses. Fueled by innovation, competition, and exploration, their arrival brought a new dimension to Corellian culture, ambition unbound. And with it came the age of hyperspace. Perhaps the most pivotal contribution Corellia made to galactic civilization was its pioneering work in hyperspace navigation. Early Corellian scouts, brave, often reckless adventurers known more for their gut instinct than mathematical precision, pushed the limits of known space using rudimentary hyperdrives and sheer nerve. It was from these early voyages that some of the galaxy's most important hyperspace routes were charted, including the legendary Corellian Run and the Corellian Trade Spine, arteries that would become lifelines for commerce, diplomacy, and warfare across the centuries. These routes were not mere flukes. They were the result of systemic mapping efforts and ingenious applications of early navigational computers, often assisted by force-sensitive wayfinders who could sense disturbances in real space compression fields. The most famous among these pioneers was Vor Danth, a hyperspace explorer whose personal journals, discovered in a buried vault beneath the Dalinar cliffs, described skirting black holes, dodging proto-nebulae, and encountering ancient ruins adrift in null space. Though most of Danth's accounts are treated with skeptical awe, the detail in his star maps remains eerily accurate. His legacy, along with that of dozens of other scouts and engineers, cemented Corellia's reputation as the heart of the hyperlanes, a world whose spirit pulsed through the space lanes of the galaxy itself. But hyperspace alone does not bind civilizations together. With the growing complexity of interplanetary relations among the Five Brothers and the increasing influence of Corellia on galactic affairs, the need for a cohesive political structure became evident. Thus was born the Corellian Council, an interplanetary body composed of elected and hereditary representatives from each of the five worlds. What made the Council unique, even by galactic standards, was its commitment to consensus-based governance and cultural parity. Unlike the Senate of the Republic, the Corellian Council emphasized unity without uniformity, allowing each world to retain its traditions and autonomy while coordinating defense, trade, and diplomacy on a sector-wide scale. The early council was a vibrant, if volatile, institution. Dral scholars argued philosophy alongside human industrialists. Selonian matriarchs clashed with Talusian traders over mineral rights, yet despite the tension, there was a rare sense of shared destiny. An understanding that Corellia's strength lay not in dominance, but in the harmony of its dissonant voices. In time, this council would prove resilient even under the weight of external pressures, from Hutt incursions in the Outer Rim to Republic mandates seeking tighter control over hyperspace routes. Through the ages, the Corellian sector continued to evolve, but it never forgot its roots. Its people, whether Selonian, Dral, or human, passed down stories of the Celestials not as scientific fact, but as cultural cornerstone. To be Corellian was to be forged by intention, driven by discovery, and unwilling to bow to fate without a fight. It was this ethos that birthed not only the ships and pilots that would become legendary across the stars, but the indomitable will that would challenge empires. And thus, from the mythic forge of ancient architects to the fiery streaks of hyperspace trails, Corellia emerged not merely as a planet, but as a force in motion, forever moving forward, forever pulling others in its wake. The story of Corellia's birth is not just a tale of stars and stone, but of minds and wills determined to chart a path where none had dared to look. It is a story still unfolding, and its echoes resonate in the engine hums of freighters and the proud oaths of scouts who whisper, even in exile, Corellia first, always. Chapter 2. The Corellian Paradox. Unity through Rebellion. Freedom forged in defiance, bound by a common will. There is a saying among Corellians passed down in smoky starport cantinas and echoed in the war rooms of freighters bristling with illegal modifications. Don't tell me what to do, and I won't tell you where to crash. That sentiment captures the marrow of Corellian identity, an unrelenting commitment to personal freedom, a cultural allergy to authoritarianism, and yet, paradoxically, a remarkable aptitude for cooperation and infrastructure. It is this contradiction that defines the Corellian paradox, how a people so fiercely individualistic could also forge one of the most efficient, unified sectors in the galaxy, producing starships, hyperspace routes, and planetary systems that serve as the very veins and arteries of galactic civilization. Corellia's independence runs deeper than political rhetoric. It is woven into the collective psyche. From childhood, Corellians are taught to value initiative, boldness, and above all, the right to chart their own course. Families rarely adhere to rigid hierarchies, businesses thrive on competition rather than regulation, and even education places greater emphasis on applied ingenuity than rote memorization. This ingrained ethos of self-reliance is not the result of political propaganda, but of millennia of cultural development born from necessity. Corellia's position as a central node in the galaxy's hyperspace network made it a target for influence from every galactic power that ever tried to consolidate control. The Corellians in turn responded not by submitting, but by innovating and resisting. The roots of Corellian anti-authoritarianism can be traced to its earliest democratic experiments. Unlike the senatorial systems favored by Coruscant or the monarchic models seen in Naboo or Alderaan, Corellian political philosophy grew from interplanetary consensus and small-scale participatory councils. City-states and sectors were governed by assemblies that rotated leadership, often by lottery or community vote, ensuring that no single lineage or ideology held sway for too long. The Corellian Council, as discussed in the previous chapter, became an extension of this belief in pluralistic governance. Even as it scaled to represent entire planets, its design resisted centralization at every turn. Councillors represented diverse factions, species, and interest groups, with few permanent positions and minimal administrative overhead. Bureaucracy, to a Corellian, was not a necessary evil, it was the enemy of action. This disdain for red tape and distant rule explains Corellia's long-standing skepticism toward galactic centralization. Even during the height of the Old Republic, Corellia maintained a degree of autonomy that bordered on rebellious. While it contributed senators to the Galactic Senate and exported goods through Republic channels, it fiercely guarded its right to self-governance. Policies passed in Coruscant were often ignored or quietly modified by Corellian local authorities. Attempts to impose Republic tariffs or restructure shipbuilding quotas were met with stubborn obstruction, legal maneuvering, and in more than one case, the outright sabotage of Republic-linked trade routes. Corellians saw themselves not as subjects of the galaxy, but as its engine, an engine that ran best when unshackled. Nowhere is this paradox of independent unity better illustrated than in Corellia's complicated relationship with the Jedi Order. Despite being a core world, Corellia never became a stronghold for the Jedi. It did not house a major temple, nor did it welcome the Order's attempts to train Force-sensitive children without local consent. This was not due to superstition or distrust of the Force itself. In fact, Corellia produced several notable Jedi, including members of the famed Halcyon family, but rather due to a deep discomfort with the Jedi's centralized hierarchy. Corellians admired Jedi courage and their commitment to justice, but they recoiled from the idea of a remote council dictating the lives of Corellian-born initiates. Many local leaders argued that the Jedi should serve the people, not the other way around. This tension birthed the Corellian Jedi tradition, a decentralized interpretation of the Jedi Code practiced by those native to the system. Corellian Jedi often operated independently of the Jedi High Council, focusing their efforts on protecting local communities and intervening only when justice demanded. They favored practical force techniques over abstract meditation and were known for their strong familial bonds, sometimes even passing Jedi training down through bloodlines in defiance of the Order's celibacy codes. These Jedi were not rogue in the way that fallen knights were. They were simply Corellian, shaped by the same winds of resistance that blew through the planet's alleyways and assembly halls. Alongside these philosophical warriors stood another embodiment of Corellian unity through rebellion, the Corellian Security Force, CorSec. Founded initially as a civilian defense initiative in the early days of the sector's industrial boom, CorSec grew into one of the most respected law enforcement bodies in the galaxy. Yet it operated on Corellian terms, with a decentralized command structure and a charter that emphasized local authority over interplanetary mandate. Unlike Imperial stormtroopers or Republic peacekeepers, CorSec agents were deeply embedded in their communities. Many came from families who had served for generations, and their loyalty was to the people of Corellia, not the whims of Senate decrees. What set CorSec apart was its dual nature. While publicly it acted as the keeper of the peace, investigating crimes, resolving disputes, and overseeing customs enforcement, it also maintained shadow units tasked with monitoring foreign influence, corporate overreach, and even Jedi interference. During periods of galactic unrest, CorSec often walked a fine line between lawful governance and active resistance. When the Republic began consolidating military production in preparation for what would become the Clone Wars, CorSec agents were instrumental in protecting Corellian shipyards from external audits and resource requisitions. Some records even suggest that CorSec provided intelligence to anti-Imperial factions long before the rebellion formally emerged. Beneath the surface of Corellian society, a more clandestine resistance culture thrived, a tapestry of smugglers, saboteurs, slicers, and rebel sympathizers who operated not out of ideology, but principle. These underground networks, many of which trace their lineage to ancient anti-monarchist cells or early pirate alliances, became the arteries through which Corellia bled resistance into the wider galaxy. While the galaxy came to know the exploits of famous Corellians like Han Solo or Garm Bel Iblis, the reality was that behind every figurehead stood dozens, if not hundreds, of anonymous operatives who maintained secret caches, falsified documents, or ran interference against foreign spies. Corellian resistance culture was unique in that it did not always seek to overthrow, it sought to withhold. While other rebel cells plotted coups or bombings, Corellians often undermined by omission, withholding taxes, delaying shipments, falsifying manifests, jamming surveillance. Their most powerful weapon was simply non-compliance, a form of rebellion that was difficult to detect and nearly impossible to suppress. Even under the tightening grip of the Empire, Corellia maintained an illusion of loyalty while quietly sheltering dissidents, leaking intelligence, and misrouting starship construction to black market buyers sympathetic to the rebel alliance. This duality, outward conformity masking inward defiance, has baffled outsiders for millennia. Corellia could not be ruled in the traditional sense because Corellians refused to view governance as anything but a contract of mutual benefit. The moment that contract tilted too far toward control, Corellians would shift, not into open revolt, but into something far more insidious, organized disobedience. Their rebellion was not a flame that flared and burned out. It was an ember, smoldering just beneath the surface, always ready to reignite. And yet, despite this persistent rebellion, Corellia remained one of the most integrated and functional systems in the galaxy. Its infrastructure was envied, Its people were innovative, and its political systems, though chaotic to outsiders, maintained a level of harmony rarely achieved even in more rigidly structured worlds. The paradox lies in the truth that Corellia's strength did not emerge in spite of its rebelliousness, but because of it. In resisting control, they learned to control themselves. In rejecting imposed unity, they forged a unity of choice. To understand Corellia, then, is to accept that rebellion and unity are not opposites but twins. It is a world that functions because it refuses to be forced to. A people that cooperate because they choose to. A system that thrives not under the yoke of order, but under the banner of earned trust. This is the Corellian paradox, and it is why, no matter who claims to rule the galaxy, Corellia remains unconquered in spirit. Chapter 3. Forging the Stars. Shipyards and Starships. Crafting the vessels that carry the galaxy. When most beings picture Corellia, they don't think of lush forests or crystalline oceans, though the planet has both. They think of ships, freighters, shuttles, blockade runners, corvettes, and yachts, each one a testament to Corellia's unparalleled mastery of starship construction. In dry dock bays suspended above the atmosphere, in factory-buried vaults beneath mountain ranges, and in cavernous industrial cities humming with plasma welders and mag clamps, Corellia forges the beating heart of the galaxy's transportation network. And at the core of this industrial saga stands one name above all others: the Corellian Engineering Corporation. Founded in the ancient days of interstellar expansion, long before the rise of the Republic's central influence, the Corellian Engineering Corporation, CEC as it is commonly known, began as a modest orbital firm dedicated to building short-range transport hulls for local planetary trade. Its earliest shipwrights were a mix of Solonian engineers and Corellian humans, operating in a pragmatic partnership that would come to define the CEC's entire design philosophy. Their goal was simple: build fast, build modular, and above all, build for those who live on the edge. While competitors across the galaxy leaned towards specialization, creating one-purpose cruisers or uniquely tuned warcraft, CC focused on versatility. Its ships were like Corellians themselves, adaptable, independent, and unapologetically bold. As the demand for interstellar shipping exploded, so did CEC's reach. By the height of the Republic era, it had become one of the big four starship manufacturers, alongside Kuat Drive Yards, Rendili Star Drive, and CNR Fleet Systems. But unlike its more militarized counterparts, CEC didn't focus on building vessels for fleets or navies, at least not officially. Instead, its market was the private citizen, the long-haul trader, the courier, the independent contractor, the smuggler. This gave rise to the infamous YT series of light freighters, a line of ships so ubiquitous and customizable that they became the de facto standard for independent operations across the galaxy. Everyone knows the Millennium Falcon, the YT-1000 300F variant made famous by Han Solo, but that ship is only one member of a vast family. The YT-1210, an earlier model, featured a bulkier body with external modular cargo pods. It was favored by corporate convoys who needed flexibility over speed. The YT-1760, lesser known but prized among pirates, had an underslung turret housing and superior thruster ports, giving it more maneuverability in low-gravity boarding actions. There was even the YT-2000, an experimental model with a central cockpit pod, rejected by the market for being too weird, yet quietly adopted by espionage groups for its unusual sensor signature. This diversity stemmed from one of CEC's most brilliant and revolutionary innovations, the modular starship frame. Rather than locking buyers into one rigid configuration, CEC ships were designed like mechanical puzzles: interchangeable components, standardized hull ports, easily swappable systems. One freighter could carry ore to an outer rim colony one week, then, with a quick retrofit, serve as a mobile lab or medivac transport the next. This approach not only fueled aftermarket demand and a massive third-party parts economy, but it also empowered generations of tinkerers, smugglers, and engineers to turn their ships into personal masterpieces. A Corellian ship, it was said, wasn't truly finished until its owner had rebuilt it at least twice. Of course, such adaptability came at a price, one paid in grey credits and deniability. The very strengths that made CEC vessels attractive to independent operators also made them ideal platforms for black market operations, weapons smuggling, illegal racing, and untraceable espionage. CEC's executives famously maintained plausible deniability, claiming they could not control what individuals did with their ships after purchase, but few were fooled. Beneath the surface of legitimate shipyards lay layers of unofficial production channels, midnight lines where unauthorized modifications were installed for the right price, entire hangar bays where criminal syndicates bribed foremen to alter ship registries or scrub hull IDs. The most notorious of these facilities were the secretive orbital shipyards hidden deep within Corellia's atmosphere skimming exospheres. These were not the gleaming factory rings open to Republic inspections and investor tours. They were shielded, compartmentalized platforms, some no larger than a capital ship, that operated independently of the planetary government. Built into asteroids, derelict stations, or cloaked from standard scans, these shipyards churned out modified freighters, blockade runners, and even pirate-hardened gunships at a fraction of the cost, and with none of the paperwork. It is whispered in underworld circles that Black Sun once owned an entire section of these yards, using them to maintain a fleet of disguised slaver transports and impound-resistant freighters. Yet these clandestine operations could not exist without the complicity, or at the very least the convenient blindness, of Corellian society itself. There exists a long-standing cultural pride among Corellians, not just in ships, but in shipbuilding. For many families, building a ship is a rite of passage. Shipwright apprenticeships begin young, sometimes as early as 12 standard years, with students learning welding, hull sealing, reactor tuning, and even microjump calibration before they're old enough to legally pilot. These apprenticeships are often handed down within families, with entire districts of cities like Tyrina and Coronet dedicated to small-scale fabrication, independent assembly yards, and aftermarket upgrade stalls. Even Corellian children's toys reflect this obsession. Block-based starship kits, mini plasma cutters with safeties, holo-sim shipwright games with real-world physics. To be a shipbuilder on Corellia is not merely to be an engineer, it is to be an artist, a protector, and sometimes even a subversive. The guilds that oversee these trades, some recognized, others unofficial, act as both educators and enforcers. They train apprentices, set material standards, and maintain a tradition of quality that no automated system has ever been able to replace. But they also ensure discretion. A guild-trained shipwright is taught when to ask questions and when not to. Modifications to sensor scramblers, hidden compartments, or disguised weapon ports are rarely logged, and inspections are handled internally. A Corellian mechanic would sooner lose a hand than betray a client's confidence. This culture of craftsmanship has birthed countless iconic vessels, many of which never make it into the HoloNet news or Senate archives. There was the Night Spur, a YT 1930 converted into a mobile spice refinery that eluded 5 years of Republic surveillance before vanishing into wild space. The Silver Lance, a courier yacht that held the unbroken subsector run record between Denon and Douro, and the Practical Myth, a bulk freighter so heavily modified with modular extensions that it doubled its own cargo capacity without compromising speed, a feat thought impossible until the crew revealed it at the annual Corellian Drift Expo. But not every ship forged on Corellia serves shadowy ends. Many of the galaxy's greatest heroes, explorers and diplomats owe their mission's success to the reliability of Corellian starcraft. The CR-90 corvette, better known as the Corellian Corvette, served as the backbone of both diplomatic missions and early Rebel Alliance operations. Its modular layout allowed for everything from troop deployments to sensor arrays and escape pods, most famously seen in the flight of the Tantive form. Even the old Republic Navy relied on Corellian frigates for patrols, supply convoys, and escort runs, trusting in their durability and ease of maintenance across long-term deployments. Indeed, one of the hidden strengths of Corellian ships is their personality. Unlike the sterile designs of Kuat or the sharp uniformity of Sienna's TIE series, Corellian vessels feel alive, responsive to their crew, idiosyncratic in their handling, and always hinting at secrets beneath the bulkheads. Pilots often describe their ships with affection, even reverence, as if they are partners rather than tools. This emotional connection is not coincidental. It is bred into the very frame of these ships. They are meant to be lived in, modified, argued with, and, when necessary, pushed beyond their design limits in the name of something greater. So when we speak of Corellia's contribution to the galaxy, we must look beyond charts and tonnage. We must look to the spark in the eye of a young shipwright welding her first engine conduit, to the steady hands of a pilot tuning his navicompt by touch, to the weathered merchant tightening the bolts on a hull panel he's replaced 5 times. Corellia does not merely build ships, it breathes them into existence. Each vessel is a fragment of its world's soul, scattered across the stars, carrying with it the spirit of ingenuity, rebellion, and freedom. And the stars, it seems, will never tire of carrying Corellian dreams. Chapter 4: The Corellian Jedi and the Flame of Autonomy. Knights of the Flame, guardians of justice, but always Corellian first. Throughout the long history of the Jedi Order, there have been those who embodied the ideals of peace, discipline, and devotion to the Force, but also those who stood at the fringes of orthodoxy, driven by unique cultural forces and unyielding local values. Nowhere is this distinction more apparent than on Corellia, a world whose Jedi did not merely wear the robes of the Order, but infused them with the colors of their own fiercely independent heritage. The Corellian Jedi were unlike any others, steadfast in their commitment to justice, yet often resistant to the hierarchical strictures of the High Council. To understand Corellia's Jedi is to understand a people who revered freedom above all else, and who saw service to their homeworld not as a duty to Coruscant, but as a sacred bond with their own people. The Corellian Jedi tradition emerged not in defiance of the larger Jedi Order, but in divergence. From the earliest days of Republic expansion into the core worlds, Corellia was both vital and obstinate. It contributed trade routes, technologies, and ships to the galactic cause, but consistently resisted centralized control. This ethos extended naturally into the Force Sentential members of its society, many of whom were identified by traveling Jedi but refused to relocate to Coruscant or to fully sever ties with their families. Corellians viewed such detachment with suspicion. Family was not a liability but a strength. Lineage was heritage, not hindrance. And so, while some Corellians joined the traditional Jedi path, many remained within their sector, establishing what would become known as the Corellian Jedi Enclave. The Jedi Temple on Corellia, located just outside Coronet City in the forested groves of Ancares, was smaller than its Coruscanti counterpart, but no less sacred. Built with native stone and shaded by towering silverleaf trees, the enclave served as both a training facility and a center for local mediation. It lacked the rigid hierarchy of the main temple and operated with a fluid structure, often rotating leadership and encouraging Jedi to train in pairs or familial lines rather than in strictly designated Master Padawan duos. Here, the code was not recited in hushed temples, but discussed openly in long halls, debated beneath moonlight, and adapted to the needs of a population that did not always fit the ideals of Republic orthodoxy. Perhaps the most emblematic figure of this tradition was Master Neja Halcyon, a Jedi Knight of Corellia whose legacy would echo through generations. A veteran of the Clone Wars, Halcyon was renowned not for his battlefield prowess, though he was formidable in combat, but for his deep empathy and unwavering loyalty to Corellia and its people. He was a man who defied convention, married in secret, a father and a protector of his home, even when doing so meant treading dangerously close to the line of expulsion from the Order. Yet, despite these transgressions, Halcyon's record was impeccable and his courage undisputed. He led with clarity, wielded his lightsaber with rare precision, and mentored countless Padawans who would follow his path, not into exile, but into a new model of Jedi service. The Halcyon bloodline, tracing its roots back centuries on Corellia, exemplified a unique philosophical approach to the Force. Where many Jedi relied on traditional lightsaber combat forms and force projection, the Halcyons specialized in more subtle applications: telepathy, concealment, energy manipulation. Some even demonstrated an uncanny talent for affecting physical materials, reshaping metal, or diffusing weapon energy. These abilities were not born from greater power, but from focused discipline, passed down like heirlooms. The Halcyons trained with intent, practiced humility, and viewed the Force not as a power to be mastered, but as a responsibility to be carried. Their legacy endured through descendants like Valin Halcyon, who after the Purge would go into hiding and eventually pass on his teachings under the assumed identity of Hal Horn. This intertwining of Jedi knowledge and local identity would later blossom again in his son, Corell Horn, a Force-sensitive pilot turned Jedi who would carry the Corellian spirit into the new generation of Jedi Knights under Luke Skywalker's emerging order. Through them, the Corellian Jedi legacy survived even the darkest of times, proof that autonomy need not breed disloyalty and that fidelity to one's home could coexist with service to the galaxy. But the Corellian Jedi were not merely defined by a handful of bloodlines. Their collective philosophy diverged significantly from that of the mainline order. Most notably, Corellian Jedi emphasized interventionism. While the High Council often deliberated for weeks before sanctioning involvement in planetary conflicts, Corellian Jedi were known to act swiftly and independently, especially in matters of justice. They walked city streets, sat in public courts, and presided over local disputes with the gravity of both judge and peacekeeper. They saw no shame in being visible, in being accessible. They wore their lightsabers not as ceremonial emblems, but as tools of purpose. Force sensitivity itself was understood differently within Corellian culture. Among the general population, those with Force abilities were not seen as distant mystics or religious figures, but as gifted citizens with civic responsibility. Families that discovered Force-sensitive children often sought to train them locally rather than surrender them to Coruscant. This led to the establishment of smaller satellite enclaves, often attached to schools, local mediation chambers, or even community defense groups. These were not always officially recognized by the Jedi Order, and many towed the line between Jedi practice and secular self-defense. But they upheld a tradition of discipline, ethics, and local loyalty that mirrored the Corellian Jedi ethos. Over time, this network of semi-autonomous Jedi activity would draw the ire of more centralized Jedi authorities. There were periods of friction, particularly during the waning centuries of the Republic, when Corellian Jedi refused to participate in galaxy-spanning campaigns that they deemed politically motivated or contrary to local values. Though not technically secessionist, their actions sometimes veered close to mutiny. The High Council attempted diplomatic outreach, sent envoys to review Corellian training standards, and occasionally recalled knights for questioning. But each time, the Corellians held firm. Their Jedi were not rogue. They were guardians, appointed not by decree, but by the will of their people. This delicate balance of autonomy and loyalty could not survive the cataclysm of the Clone Wars. As the Republic militarized and Jedi became generals rather than guardians, the Corellian enclave struggled to maintain its identity. Some of its knights were pulled into the war, reluctantly serving alongside clone battalions. Others remained home, defending their worlds from separatist sabotage and espionage. The lines between local duty and galactic obligation blurred, and when Order 66 was issued, the Corellian Jedi were caught in the same merciless purge that swept away their counterparts across the galaxy. The Temple of Anchorez fell not in fire, but in silence. Imperial forces, supported by Corsec units compromised or coerced, moved swiftly. The archives were seized, the crystals shattered, the training rooms sealed beneath durasteel. Surviving Jedi fled into hiding, aided by old friends, loyal guilds, and silent informants within Corellia's underground. The enclave, as a physical place, ceased to exist. But as an idea, it lived on, in families who remembered their protectors, in stories whispered by pilots in hyperspace bars, in the lessons passed from parent to child, hidden behind trade skills and old family heirlooms. Today, the legacy of the Corellian Jedi is not preserved in statues or temples, but in the acts of those who believe justice must be swift, that the Force belongs to the people, and that no code should outweigh conscience. They were the Knights of Corellia, not rebels against the Jedi, but reminders of what the Order could be when it remembered its roots, not as rulers, but as guardians, not as judges from afar, but as lights walking among the people they swore to protect. In every act of righteous defiance, in every quiet stand against injustice, the flame of the Corellian Jedi still burns. Chapter 5. Cultures Within. Humans, Drull, Selonians, and more. One sector, many worlds, one shared legacy. To the casual observer, or worse, the galactic outsider, Corellia is often mistakenly thought of as a purely human world. Its most famous exports are human: starship captains, diplomats, pilots, smugglers, and political firebrands. Its capital, Coronet City, is a marvel of human architecture, and its major industries reflect distinctly human priorities: mobility, freedom, and self-determination. But this view is tragically incomplete. At its heart, Corellia is not a monolith of species or values. It is a fusion, a living mosaic of interwoven cultures that have coexisted, conflicted, and collaborated for millennia. Beyond the boulevards of Coronet and the echoing hangars of shipyards lie the ancient warrens of the Selonians, the dignified halls of the Drull, and the quiet resilience of a system built not on uniformity, but shared purpose. The Drull, perhaps the most overlooked of Corellia's native species, are small, stocky, and unassuming, easily misjudged by those accustomed to equating size with strength. Yet among Corellian peoples, the Drull are widely revered as the keepers of wisdom and memory. Their societies are anchored not in conquest, but in contemplation. With fur coats of deep umber, small paws nimble enough for both circuitry and calligraphy, and eyes that shimmer with quiet intellect, Drull have long embraced a philosophy of pacifism and scholarly pursuit. It is said that to wrong a Drull is to lose an argument 3 generations later, for their memory is both cultural and personal, painstakingly recorded in libraries, archives, and familial tablets passed down with religious care. Governance among the Drull is decentralized, guided by councils of elders who are selected not by age alone, but by demonstrated clarity of thought and integrity. These councils consult extensively with historians, ethicists, and educators before rendering decisions. Among Drull, truth is sacred, and any manipulation of history is considered an offense greater than theft or violence. It was the Drull who maintained the earliest accurate records of the Corellian system's pre-Republic past, preserving details about the mysterious planetary alignments and the legends of the Celestials, long after such tales were dismissed elsewhere. Their devotion to historical fidelity is not merely academic, it is existential. The Drull believe that to lose sight of one's past is to drift unanchored in the great current of the galaxy. In contrast, the Selonians are a species of motion, hierarchy, and deep instinctual structure. Tall and powerfully built, their sleek fur-covered bodies are adapted to life in burrows, tunnels, and subterranean warrens, many of which remain hidden beneath Corellian cities to this day. They are a hive species, socially organized into warrens led by dominant matriarchs. These matriarchs are not tyrants, but caretakers, charged with the physical, spiritual, and cultural survival of their group. Within each warren, individuals are born into roles, determined not by aptitude, but by sacred lineage and biological designation. Warriors, engineers, philosophers, and speakers each form integral parts of the whole, functioning less like a government and more like an organism. Honor among Selonians is paramount. While they value community above all, individual bravery and reputation play a significant role in social standing. When serious conflicts arise, whether territorial disputes or accusations of dishonor, They are often resolved through structured honor duels, non-lethal combat rituals in which warriors seek to prove virtue rather than inflict injury. These duels are sacred, sometimes witnessed by entire warrens, and serve as both conflict resolution and moral theatre. To the untrained eye, they may appear brutal. To a Solonian, they are a dialogue in motion, an argument waged not with words, but with poise and precision. Despite their physical prowess and structured society, Solonians are not inflexible. They have shown remarkable adaptability, particularly during the expansion of Corellian urban centers. Many have taken up roles in engineering, urban development, and military defense, their warren-based coordination perfectly suited to complex logistical tasks. However, they have always resisted full assimilation into human-dominated governance, preferring to interact through designated emissaries and matriarchal representatives. Their worldview is fundamentally communal, and large-scale decisions affecting Solonians are rarely made without deep consultation within and between warrens. Drawl and Solonians both hold seats within the Corellian Council, a governing body structured not around species parity but sectoral representation, ensuring that each planet and social group contributes its voice. While humans hold the majority of numerical presence in the Council, they do not dominate it in spirit. Drawl councillors, with their encyclopedic knowledge and measured rhetoric, are often the conscience of the chamber. Slow to vote but impossible to ignore, the Solonian matriarchs, with their gravitas and oratorical discipline, command immediate attention whenever they rise to speak. This interspecies council is one of Corellia's most unique political achievements, offering a model for pluralistic governance that survives not through forced equality, but through mutual respect. Of course, such harmony has not always come easily. There have been moments of cultural friction, especially during periods of galactic upheaval when outside powers sought to manipulate Corellia's internal dynamics. The Empire, for instance, notoriously attempted to pit Solonians against humans by offering exclusive contracts for subterranean weapons factories beneath Solonian territory. When the matriarchs collectively refused, citing violations of Corellian sovereignty, Imperial agents retaliated with covert sabotage and propaganda campaigns. The result was not division, but solidarity. In a rare joint declaration, human, Drawl, and Solonian leaders reaffirmed their shared autonomy and expelled Imperial contractors from several industrial districts, despite the economic cost. The message was clear: Corellia may be diverse, but it is indivisible. The cultural calendar of Corellia also reflects this mosaic. While some celebrations are human-centric, such as the Festival of Light Drivers, honoring the invention of hyperspace routes, others draw from Drawl and Solonian traditions. The Day of Memory, a solemn Drawl observance, sees families gather in silence to read aloud passages from their ancestral records. In urban centers, public recitations are held where anyone may contribute a family story, regardless of species. The Solonians mark the Cycle of Stone, a multi-day festival in which entire warrens emerge to reenact founding myths through song, dance, and mock battle. These events are open to outsiders but strictly observed, and to disrespect the ritual is to offend not only the performers but their entire social lineage. In more recent decades, hybrid traditions have begun to emerge. Interspecies unions, once rare, are becoming more accepted, especially among younger Corellians raised in mixed districts. These families often blend customs, combining Drawl education rituals with Solonian rites of passage, or celebrating human holidays with borrowed phrases from other tongues. This cultural cross-pollination has given rise to new artistic movements, culinary fusions, and even linguistic hybrids spoken only in certain districts of Coronet City. It has not always been smooth. Tensions persist in more traditional sectors, and extremist voices occasionally call for purity in governance or heritage, but these voices remain marginal, drowned out by the lived reality of cooperation, cohabitation, and shared pride in what Corellia has become. Ultimately, the strength of Corellia lies not in its technology, its pilots, or even its strategic position on the hyperlanes. Its true power comes from the rich interplay of its peoples, each bringing a distinct vision of life, community, and meaning. The Drow teach it to remember, the Solonians to stand together, and the humans to always seek the horizon. It is a symphony of values, a delicate balance of voices, and, despite all odds, it endures. This is the soul of Corellia, not a singular identity, but a shared one, not a uniform melody, but a chord composed of difference. And it is this chord, struck again and again across the centuries, that has made Corellia not only a planet, but a promise. Chapter 6. Corellia in the Shadows. Smugglers, Spies, and Syndicates. Where the hyperlanes cross, so too do secrets flow. Corellia's brilliance in the galactic tapestry is not limited to its shining shipyards or storied independence. Beneath the surface of its industrial might and civic unity lies another realm entirely, a shadowed underworld of whisper networks, untraceable manifests, and hyperspace corridors pulsing with contraband. As one of the galaxy's busiest hyperlane junctions, Corellia has always stood at the crossroads of commerce. But with such commerce comes opportunity, not just for trade but for evasion, for secrets, and for profit beyond the scrutiny of law. Corellia, by geography and by spirit, was born to be a smuggler's paradise. No route exemplifies this better than the Corellian Run, one of the oldest and most vital hyperlanes in the galaxy. Stretching from the core worlds deep into the outer rim, the run cuts through a dozen key systems and acts as a lifeline for military logistics, merchant traffic, and, crucially, smuggling operations. What made the Corellian Run so infamous was not just its breadth, but its density. Along its length branched dozens of unofficial side channels, old mining paths, decommissioned relay routes, hidden gravity wells long forgotten by Republic maps. These shadow veins, as Spacers called them, became the arteries through which illegal goods flowed. Spice from Kessel, weapon parts from Ord Mantell, forged data cores from Denin, and even live cargo, slaves and fugitives spirited away under false registry codes. Corellia's proximity to these routes and its shipbuilding culture that prioritized speed, stealth, and motifiability made it a natural home for smugglers. For centuries, the planet's orbital customs stations played a game of wits with captains whose holds carried more than they declared. Hull compartments were reshaped to fool scanners. Engines were retrofitted to mimic freighters of other classes. One legendary smuggler, Ravo Kintash, was known to operate a fleet of near-identical YT-1210 sesh, each one identical in visual signature but uniquely modified for different types of illicit cargo. By rotating them between known ports and using droid proxy pilots, he created the illusion of a phantom ship, seemingly able to be in 5 places at once. Though Han Solo would become the galaxy's most iconic Corellian smuggler, he was hardly the only one to etch his name into galactic lore. Years before Solo made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs, Dreeg Sarnik ran an underground route through the Maelstrom Rift, delivering refined rill to mid-rim hospitals while dodging both Separatist and Republic patrols. Exa Dran, a Solonian smuggler matriarch, led a Warren-born crew across the Corellian trade spine, using their vessel's living quarters to conceal escapees from Imperial conscription. Her ship, the Burrower, was never once boarded successfully, a feat attributed as much to Corellian engineering as to the subtle art of bribe negotiation. These figures, and dozens like them, made their fortunes not only on speed and nerve, but on the invisible network of fixers, forgers, and fences that spanned Corellia's seediest sectors. And behind it all loomed the long shadows of syndicates. The Black Sun, one of the most powerful and ruthless criminal organizations in the galaxy, maintained a strong presence in Corellia's underworld, especially during the waning years of the Republic and into the Imperial era. Their influence wasn't overt. They didn't parade through the streets or leave insignia on cargo crates, but their touch could be felt in every corrupt official who waved a freighter through inspection, in every port authority worker who lost a registry file, in every city sector where credits spoke louder than law. They brokered deals in spice dens, rigged industrial contracts, and skimmed percentages off everything from fuel shipments to land deeds. During the Clone Wars and its chaotic aftermath, another syndicate rose to power in Corellia's darker corners, the Zan Consortium. Where Black Sun operated with careful precision and a veneer of business legitimacy, the Zan Consortium embraced open disruption. Led by the charismatic and ruthless Tiber Zan, the group specialized in slicing, sabotage, and military-grade theft. Corellia's shipyards, ever a target for both the Republic and its enemies, became a battleground of quiet raids and cyber warfare. Zan agents would hack fabrication orders, reroute parts to shadow depots, or outright steal prototype vessels from test bays, sometimes with the unwitting help of bribed shipwrights or compromised engineers. Amid this tangle of crime and conspiracy stood the Corellian security force, CorSec, charged with keeping the peace but often outmatched by the scale of the challenge. To their credit, many CorSec officers were brave and incorruptible, veterans of internal wars against racketeers and black market operations. But others, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of smuggling and seduced by the credits changing hands, became double agents, feeding information to syndicates or deliberately misplacing investigation files. Entire precincts were known to look the other way in certain sectors, and officers who dug too deep into smuggling rings often found themselves reassigned or disappeared. Yet not all corruption was selfish. In the shifting political tides of the late Republic and early Empire, many Corellians found themselves morally at odds with the central government. As the Senate stagnated and the Empire grew increasingly brutal, a quiet revolution stirred in back alleys and high towers alike. Business leaders, civic organizers, and even some within CorSec began funneling resources to the burgeoning Free Corellia movement, a loose but resilient network of anti-authoritarian activists dedicated to resisting Imperial control. This movement was not uniform. Some cells focused on espionage and sabotage. Others worked to extract endangered citizens, hide force-sensitive individuals, or leak intelligence to the growing rebellion. But all shared one unifying belief: Corellia belonged to its people, not to distant tyrants. Intriguingly, the movement's support base included some of Corellia's wealthiest elites. These were not rebels in rags. They were starship magnates, transport moguls, and even retired senators. Some acted out of principle, remembering the Republic's original values. Others acted out of profit, seeing in the Empire a stranglehold on free trade and private enterprise. A few played both sides, donating to Imperial charities by day and funding smuggler convoys by night. Their duplicity was often masked by public piety and civic engagement, but within the right circles they were known simply as the Quiet Flame, those who kept Corellia's spirit alive, even while wearing Imperial medals. The Free Corellia movement remained fragmented by design, with no central leadership to target and no single doctrine to betray. One cell might focus on hacking starport manifests to conceal rebel landings. Another might smuggle blasters to dissidents in Salonia. Another still might operate a secret underground railroad for escaped slaves from Imperial mining colonies. What unified them was not ideology, but identity, a belief that Corellia, diverse and proud, could not, must not, be changed. Their actions, though often shrouded in secrecy, rippled outward. Rebel intelligence cells throughout the Mid-Rim spoke in hushed awe of Corellia's efficiency. Smugglers moved goods faster and with fewer losses when routed through Corellian fixers. Even Mon Mothma herself is rumored to have received information from a Corellian data broker during her earliest efforts to unify the rebellion. Today, many of these stories remain half-told, hidden behind sealed archives, corrupted flight logs, and the quiet humility of those who lived them. Corellians do not celebrate rebellion for the sake of fame. They do it because it is right, because it is in their blood to resist domination, be it political, military, or criminal. In the underworld's darkest corners, they found light not in law, but in conscience. Their smugglers became symbols of freedom, their spies became lifelines for a better galaxy, and their syndicate survivors, those who played both sides, became reminders that even in murky waters, Corellia never stopped charting its own course. In the shadows, Corellia forged something no empire could contain, a quiet rebellion grounded in grit, fueled by justice and driven always, always forward. Chapter 7. War comes to Corellia. Conflict and resistance. Strategic in position, reluctant in allegiance, unyielding in spirit. Though Corellia has always stood proudly at the center of the galactic map, its role in galactic conflicts has rarely followed the expected pattern of core world compliance. From the chaotic years of the Clone Wars to the dark tyranny of the Galactic Empire and the upheaval of the Galactic Civil War, Corellia played a game of careful distance and selective resistance. A world built on trade and independence, it had no appetite for conquest or submission. And yet, when war came, as it inevitably did, Corellia did not shrink from the fight. Instead, it carved its own path through the blood and fire, with both quiet subterfuge and open defiance. During the Clone Wars, as the galaxy fractured along the lines of Republic and Separatist, Corellia found itself in a particularly volatile position. As a founding member of the Republic, Corellia had deep institutional ties to the galactic structure, yet its people viewed the creeping centralization of power in the Senate with growing unease. The militarization of the Republic, the secrecy surrounding clone production, and the use of emergency powers by Chancellor Palpatine were all seen by Corellians, especially those in the Council and Corsec, as signs that something darker was taking root beneath the surface. Officially, Corellia pledged support to the Republic. Unofficially, many of its sectors practiced neutrality, withholding troops, resources, and intelligence unless local defense was involved. Behind the veil of neutrality, however, war industries flourished. Hidden within the valleys of Selonia, deep under the industrial platforms of Tyrina, and even buried within the asteroid fields of the Corellian system's outer belt, clandestine weapons manufacturing centers produced arms for both sides of the war. Some facilities were legitimate, shipyards commissioned by the Republic to construct corvettes, support vessels, and modular cargo haulers modified for military supply lines. Others were far less official, producing unauthorized blasters, munitions, and experimental starfighter components for corporate warlords, rogue senators, and even separatist-elect mercenaries. These operations were not acts of treason, but acts of survival, Corellia hedging its bets in a galaxy whose future was increasingly unclear. Despite this duplicity, Corellian lives were still lost in the Clone Wars. Skirmishes erupted in high-orbit shipping lanes, pirate raids surged across the trade spine, and separatist espionage cells attempted to sabotage key shipyards to stall Republic supply chains. In response, Corellia bolstered its planetary defenses with grim efficiency, relying on Corsec's elite urban security units and conscripted militias to hold key installations. But the scars of the war would run deeper than surface damage or ledger losses. The trust between Corellia and the Republic was permanently weakened, and when the Empire rose from the ashes of the war, Corellia did not embrace it with open arms, but neither did it openly revolt. Under the Galactic Empire, Corellia's stance was one of guarded compliance. Its industries were too valuable to the Emperor's military machine to be abandoned or alienated, and so Corellia was afforded a degree of autonomy uncommon among even the core worlds. Governors were installed, of course, and Imperial doctrine crept into schools, factories, and broadcast channels. But the true conquest of Corellia proved elusive. The people obeyed, but only just. They allowed stormtroopers to patrol their streets, but watched them with cold eyes. They built TIE fighters in their shipyards, but sabotaged a percentage of each batch. And beneath the veneer of obedience, the embers of resistance began to glow. One of the first to fan those flames was Bel Iblis, a fiery senator whose political career had been forged during the late Republic and tempered by disillusionment. A proud Corellian with a fierce belief in liberty, Bel Iblis was among the first to denounce Palpatine's rise to emperor and withdraw from the newly formed Imperial Senate in protest. He saw what others could not, or would not, that the Empire was not a protector, but a parasite. Beliblis did not wait for a formal rebellion to take shape. He organized cells, stockpiled arms, and converted hidden transport yards into military staging grounds. His version of the rebellion was decentralized, secretive, and driven not by politics, but by principle. Long before he joined Mon Mothma and Bail Organa in the formal alliance to restore the Republic, he waged his own war beneath the shadows of Corellia's cities. These cities, labyrinthine, vertical, and alive with noise, became battlegrounds of subterfuge. In the sewers beneath Coronet, rebel safehouses masqueraded as pump stations. In the loading bays of orbital elevators, droids disguised as maintenance units ferried intelligence to hidden transmitters. Abandoned maglev stations were repurposed as training halls for resistance fighters, while holo simulation rooms in elite academies doubled as encrypted recruitment centers. It was a war of whispers and hidden doors. Corsec itself, long trusted as a guardian of public safety, was torn between loyalty and rebellion. Some officers followed Imperial orders to the letter. Others, burned by corruption or moved by conscience, leaked documents, hid fugitives, or fed false reports to their superiors. It was not unusual for a Corsec patrol to arrest a rebel cell, only for the prisoners to mysteriously escape in transit with no questions asked. Civil liberties were suspended, broadcast channels were seized, curfews were imposed across major cities, and dissent was punished with sudden disappearances. Yet Corellia, ever resistant to the yoke, did not buckle. It fought back, not with legions, but with resilience. Urban warfare broke out in pockets. In the underlevel of Tyrina, a rebel ambush on an Imperial convoy turned into a 3-day siege, with firefights erupting through transit tunnels and entire districts blacked out by power grid sabotage. In Bela Vistal, an entire neighborhood vanished behind barricades erected overnight by citizens who refused to surrender a resistance leader. Imperial reinforcements were forced to retreat after losing control of key intersections, their own tanks disabled by magnetic charges hidden in trash piles. These weren't traditional battles. They were acts of insurgency, planned by ghost cells executed by everyday Corellians. Dock workers, slicers, former Corsec officers, and medics who refused to serve the Empire. Not all of these actions were coordinated by the Alliance. Much of Corellia's resistance operated independently, loyal to the idea of freedom, not the structure of rebellion. In fact, Beliblis himself broke with the Rebel Alliance for a time, distrustful of central authority and wary of placing Corellia's fate in the hands of off-worlders. His forces, though aligned in purpose, often acted without communication with Mon Mothma's forces, leading to overlapping operations and even occasional interference. But in the end, this decentralized resistance proved to be one of Corellia's greatest strengths. There was no head to cut off, no command structure to dismantle. Every cell was autonomous, every fighter trained to disappear, and every attack rooted in local support. The Empire never truly conquered Corellia. It occupied it, certainly, and scarred it. It extracted its ships, intimidated its governors, and left its mark on the skyline in the form of surveillance towers and prison blocks. But the planet's heart remained defiant. When the second Death Star was destroyed and the Imperial chain of command began to fracture, Corellia was one of the first core worlds to rise. Rebel banners were hoisted in shipyards. Imperial flags were torn down in the market squares. Troopers deserted or surrendered en masse, unwilling to fight in a system that had always loathed their presence. The Free Corellia movement emerged from hiding, and Beliblis returned to the spotlight as a hero, his words broadcast from the same towers that once spread Imperial propaganda. In the end, war did come to Corellia, not because Corellia sought it, but because tyranny cannot coexist with liberty. And when it did, Corellia responded not with a single voice, but with 1,000,000 acts of resistance. In every hacked comline, every sabotaged patrol, every smuggled datapad and hidden fugitive, the people of Corellia waged their war. Not for glory, not for conquest, but because no empire, no matter how vast, could crush the will of a planet born to be free. Chapter 8. Coronet City, Jewel of Industry and Corruption, where skyline dreams collide with sewer secrets. Perched like a gleaming crown along the western coast of Corellia's largest continent, Coronet City stands as both beacon and contradiction. It is the heart of Corellian commerce, culture, and political influence, an industrial marvel that pulses with starship engines and negotiation deals, humming with the lifeblood of trade and ambition. But beneath its glistening skyline, beneath the towering spires and transit rails, Coronet is also a city of shadows, deeply carved by class divides, old rivalries, and layers of corruption as entrenched as its foundations. To understand Coronet City is to confront the Corellian paradox in its most urban form, a place of boundless opportunity built atop secrets and compromise, where dreams rise on repulsor while danger lurks in alleys below. The skyline of Coronet is a symbol of progress. Its towers, curving, transparent, and vertically lush, stand testament to centuries of economic growth and architectural experimentation. Unlike the rigid spires of Coruscant, Coronet's buildings were designed with grace and adaptability in mind. Sky bridges connect high-rise habitats to orbital tram hubs, and entire rooftop ecosystems provide food and air filtration for elite neighborhoods. The city was not built all at once, but evolved across eras, its infrastructure growing like an organism, layer upon layer, each with its own purpose and aesthetic. From the top decks of the Finance Dome to the sensor-dampened docking zones of the Central Port Ring, every corner of Coronet pulses with a purpose. But for all its elegance, Coronet's beating heart is industrial. The shipyards that stretch beyond its sea-facing edge are among the largest in the galaxy. Entire starship hulls are assembled in orbital cranes, guided by microgravity lifts and powered by fusion forges that light up the night sky with blue-white flame. Droids and human workers operate side by side, following carefully calculated production rhythms honed over centuries. It is here that the famed Corellian Engineering Corporation cut its teeth, and here that generations of shipwrights have shaped vessels destined for trade, war, and everything in between. This blend of function and flair bleeds into one of Coronet's most beloved subcultures, speeder design and racing. Unlike the regulated swoop circuits of Ord Mantell or the brutal blood races of Nar Shaddaa, Corellian speeder racing is as much a lifestyle as it is a sport. Every district has its own garage culture, young engineers, slicers and daredevils modifying civilian craft into lightning-fast racers. Speed aesthetics are often tied to neighborhood pride, with different boroughs producing signature paint styles, engine harmonics, and even custom stabilizer fins. The underground racing circuit, known as the Black Line Run, courses through old sewer mains, half-Kamaclius maglev tunnels, and forgotten storm drainage shafts, lit by glow ads and flickering power grids. These races are illegal, deadly, and wildly popular, with even Corsec officers rumored to place credits on favored racers. But not all of Coronet rides on speed and spectacle. Its underground districts, literal and metaphorical, tell a grittier story. Below the surface-level brilliance are the lower levels, a sprawling network of infrastructural catacombs, old habitats, forgotten transit loops, and sealed-off maintenance corridors. These areas, often home to displaced laborers, low-gym families, and the city's drifter population, form a parallel society where barter economies thrive, surveillance is easily avoided, and community is forged in the crucible of necessity. It is here that the city's smuggling networks take root, where slicers set up data hubs in the shells of broken droid factories, and where old rebels once passed through sewer conduits. Despite efforts to modernize these regions, they persist, resilient, vibrant, and vital. Markets operate in candle-lit alcoves, offering scavenged droid parts, exotic off-world produce, and things that cannot be legally named. Gangs run protection, but some are seen more as community enforcers than criminals, stepping in where Corsec neglects. Here, the city's most marginalized people create art, culture, and identity that often bleeds upward into the surface, influencing fashion trends, speech patterns, and even political movements. In contrast, Coronet's educational and institutional sectors reflect Corellia's high regard for knowledge, innovation, and engineering tradition. The University of Coronet, a sprawling, multi-campus institution nestled in the arts quarter of the Central District, produces some of the galaxy's most gifted ship designers, astrophysicists, and diplomatic strategists. Its halls are lined with hollow records dating back thousands of years, and its mentorship programs pair students with retired CEC engineers, former CorSec intelligence operatives, and off-world guest scholars. The university is fiercely independent, often clashing with both planetary government and galactic authorities when academic freedom is threatened. Other institutions carry weight as well. The CorSec Academy, with its strict admissions process and deeply entrenched alumni networks, trains not just law enforcement officers, but also security analysts, mediators, and urban planners. Graduates of the academy are as likely to join off-world intelligence agencies as they are to serve within Corellia. Across the city, private institutes offer specialized training in starship operation, AI ethics, and hyperspace route modeling, with programs that attract students from across the mid and inner rim. Education in Coronet is not seen as a privilege, but as a cultural expectation, and even in the city's poorest districts, learning is revered. Yet for all its advancement, corruption is a constant undercurrent, a byproduct of Corellia's love for autonomy and its disdain for bureaucratic oversight. The higher one climbs in Coronet's towers, the more invisible the deals become. Government contracts are awarded in back rooms. Zoning laws are rewritten by urban advisors with undisclosed sponsors, and tech companies funnel credits through shell corporations linked to both Black Sun and off-world lobbying groups. Many civic projects are genuinely beneficial. New hospitals, transit expansions, environmental restoration, but they almost always carry a hidden cost, a percentage skimmed or a favor owed. Even CorSec, nominally the guardian of public trust, has struggled with internal corruption. Officers are regularly rotated to avoid entrenchment, and internal affairs droids are assigned to audit precincts without warning. Still, bribes change hands, surveillance records disappear, and smugglers operate with quiet assurance that someone above is shielding them. Yet Coronet is not without heroes. Many of Corellia's most influential figures were born within its districts, raised on its streets, educated in its schools, and forged by its contradictions. Garm Bel Iblis, before becoming a symbol of rebellion, was once a junior administrator in the Coronet Economic Board, known for challenging unfair trade levies that disadvantaged outer districts. Han Solo, smuggler-turned-hero, grew up in Coronet's underlevels, navigating gang politics and skylane theft before escaping to the stars. Even famed shipwright Elena Vren, whose revolutionary modular hyperdrive core reshaped the YT-2400 series, was raised in a single-room flat above a speeder garage in South Coronet. These names are but a few in a long line of Corellians shaped by Coronet's paradoxical nature. For every tale of corruption, there is one of resilience. For every illegal arms deal brokered in a Skyline suite, there is a medic in the lower levels offering treatment for free. Coronet is not a city that pretends to be perfect. It is a city that thrives on the tension between greatness and grit. It is both the jewel of Corellia and the scar that proves it has survived countless storms. In its alleys and towers, in its transit lines and racing circuits, in its lecture halls and stolen data dens, Coronet City pulses with the life of a planet that refuses to be one thing. It is where innovation is born, secrets are traded, and destiny is forged, not by decree, but by will. Chapter 9. Corellia after the Empire, Reconstruction and Renewal. A future forged from fragments of war. The fall of the Galactic Empire did not bring peace to Corellia overnight. When the battle stations fell and the Emperor perished, the sky did not suddenly brighten, nor did the economic ledgers balance themselves. Instead, what followed was a long, uneasy exhale, a moment of quiet riddled with uncertainty, where celebration mingled with exhaustion, and the people of Corellia were left to reckon with what they had lost, what they had preserved, and what they would dare to become. In the vacuum of tyranny's collapse, Corellia was not liberated by outside forces, it liberated itself. But with freedom came the weight of reconstruction, a task not just of rebuilding shattered shipyards and governance, but of redefining identity in a galaxy still rippling from war. The immediate aftermath of the Empire's fall saw a surge in planetary pride. Street banners bearing the Imperial cog were torn down and burned. The old Corellian flags, stored in basements and passed through families in secret, were raised once more on government buildings and spaceport terminals. The Corellian Council, long dormant and ceremonial under Imperial rule, was rapidly reconstituted, this time as a functional, multi-species governing body with real legislative teeth. Elections were held not at gunpoint but with community participation. Matriarchs from Solonian warrens took their seats alongside human trade representatives and droll historians, arguing fiercely, as they had centuries prior, about infrastructure, sovereignty, and Corellian self-rule. The process was chaotic, impassioned, and uniquely Corellian. A reaffirmation that governance here was not a favor granted by the Galactic Center, but a right reclaimed. Reconstruction efforts began almost immediately, though they were far from uniform. Some districts of Coronet City, particularly those that had suffered heavy damage during the Imperial crackdowns, prioritized housing, utilities, and basic security. Others focused on revitalizing the economic engine of the planet, the shipyards. The massive orbital platforms, once dominated by TIE fighter production and stripped bare of local control, were returned to Corellian hands. Many were in disrepair, their control systems gutted or sabotaged during Imperial withdrawal. Thousands of engineers, laborers, and retired shipwrights flooded back to the yards, guided by a sense of purpose not seen since the early Republic. They began to dismantle the Imperial influence piece by piece, replacing automated slave circuits with human interface consoles, removing classified monitoring tech, and restoring modular flexibility to ship design. But as the new Republic formalized itself and began asserting authority over the core worlds, tensions flared. Corellia had no interest in replacing one centralized government with another. While it acknowledged the new Republic's legitimacy, many Corellians demanded substantial autonomy, particularly in matters of trade, taxation, and military production. The new Republic, eager to avoid the mistakes of its predecessor, sought to impose standardized tariffs and export regulations, intended to prevent corruption and promote economic fairness. To Corellia's traditionalists, this smelled far too much like the Republic of old. Heated disputes erupted within the Council and across the Senate floor. Corellian representatives threatened secession. Trade guilds, especially those tied to the shipbuilding and hyperspace logistics industries, began negotiating with off-world buyers independent of New Republic channels, daring the new government to respond. This political strain sparked a deeper cultural rift within Corellian society itself. A new generation, born during the Empire's reign and matured in the fires of rebellion, began to push against the old ways. These youths were cosmopolitan, networked, and unafraid of galactic integration. They welcomed regulation that protected labor rights, environmental reforms that cleaned the Solonia waterways, and educational exchanges that brought off-world students into Corellian institutions. To them, the Corellian exceptionalism of their elders felt outdated, an excuse for corporate exploitation and civic stagnation. They embraced a renaissance of art, music, and hollow literature, blending Corellian themes with galactic styles, creating everything from fusion theatre that reinterpreted Solonian war chants as interpretive dance, to holographic novels that depicted the Imperial occupation through the lens of a Dral archivist's private grief. Corellian holodrama boomed during this period, as creators explored not only the trauma of war, but the philosophical question of identity in a galaxy trying to heal. Films like Steel in the Sewers and The Last Docklight earned acclaim across the mid-rim, while the Coronet Frequency, a hybrid audio holo art collective, began transmitting experimental soundscapes across public comm lines. mixing shipyard industrial noise with monologues from rebel defectors. Public art initiatives reclaimed entire city blocks, painting murals over scorched ferrocrete and transforming burned-out barracks into cultural centers. In the Dral neighborhoods of southern Coronet, ancestral tales were digitized and turned into immersive VR walkthroughs, preserving oral history while inviting a new generation to explore them in sensory depth. Yet even in this cultural bloom, Corellia remained fractious. Tensions with neighboring systems, especially within the Corellian sector itself, began to rise, as resource sharing and border jurisdiction became contentious. Trallus and Talus, often treated as junior partners in economic planning, demanded more equitable influence within the sector. Solonian communes, having borne disproportionate environmental damage during Imperial industrialization, demanded reparations and land recognition. Rural archivists petitioned the council to repatriate historical artifacts taken from their libraries under Republic and Imperial governance. Corellia's return to self-rule was proving as difficult as it was vital, its many voices competing not to dominate but to be heard. The new Republic, for its part, walked a careful line. Corellia was too valuable to alienate, too proud to coerce. Diplomatic envoys came and went, offering compromise after compromise. Some were accepted, many rejected. Ultimately, Corellia chose a semi-detached alignment, supporting the new Republic's ideals while demanding the right to implement them in its own way. It was a familiar dance, one the planet had performed since the days of the Old Republic, but this time the players had changed. The scars of war were still fresh. The ghosts of occupation still walked the shipyards and shadowed the halls of government, and amid all this, a new Corellia was being born, one forged not only from freedom, but from accountability, remembrance, and a reluctant optimism. The Corellians had survived the fall of one empire, resisted the rise of another, and emerged into the uncertainty of peace with their identity intact. But peace, they had learned, was not an end. It was a process, and in that process they found a new challenge. Not to resist domination, but to define what freedom meant when the threat was no longer an enemy fleet, but one's own history. This was Corellia after the Empire, fractured yet whole, grieving yet alive, scarred yet determined to build. Not just starships, but a society worthy of their legacy. Chapter 10. The Corellian Legacy. Heroes, Innovators, and Identity. Freedom as inheritance, defiance as culture, ingenuity as destiny. Throughout the galaxy, when Corellia is mentioned, certain images come to mind. The gleam of starships cutting across hyperspace lanes, the roar of modded speeders through neon-lit alleyways, the smirk of a smuggler who knows more than he says and says more than he should. But behind the steel and swagger lies something deeper. A legacy not of weapons or rebellion alone, but of ideas. Corellia has never sought to dominate the galaxy. It has sought to shape it, to challenge it, and to survive it without losing itself. It is a world built on freedom, hardened by defiance, and illuminated by ingenuity. A triumvirate of cultural virtues that continue to define its people long after the banners of empire and rebellion have faded. Central to the Corellian worldview is a quiet, stubborn philosophy passed down not in scriptures or schools, but in sayings, glances, and deeds. The Corellians rarely speak in manifestos. Instead, they tell stories, brief, sharp, and filled with meaning. Old pilots warn that, "You don't trust a ship you haven't fixed yourself." Teachers remind students that a loudmouth draws blaster fire, and engineers whisper to apprentices, "Everything breaks, but smart things break the right way." These proverbs are more than idioms. They are survival tools, social truths polished across generations of risk-takers, builders, and rebels. They reflect a culture that values action over rhetoric, results over pretense, and cleverness over brute force. Nowhere is this cultural outlook more mythologized than in the idea of Corellian luck, a near-mythic quality said to favor those born beneath Corellia's stars. Corellian luck is not about random fortune. It is a narrative, a self-fulfilling confidence that dares the impossible and somehow pulls it off. It is the belief that when the odds are against you, the trick is not to fold, but to reroute the hyperdrive, recalibrate the sensors and jump blind into the void. It is not that Corellians are luckier than others, but that they believe they are, and that belief gives them the courage to try what others won't. From war heroes to sabak champions, this legend permeates Corellian identity, passed down like a talisman through bloodlines, hangar bays, and childhood tales whispered at dusk. Yet for every Han Solo or Garm Bel Iblis etched into the galactic memory, there are countless Corellian figures forgotten by history, their legacies buried beneath bureaucracy or lost in the footnotes of larger wars. There was Vera Kintar, a Solonian matriarch who smuggled over 300 dissidents out of Imperial space using a repurposed medical barge and falsified death certificates. Her ship, the Womb, became legend among rebel circles, but her name was omitted from official records due to Republic discomfort with Solonian autonomy movements. There was Byrek Zane, a rogue Jedi exiled for refusing to arrest Corellian workers protesting Republic tariffs, who instead founded a rural enclave where he secretly trained Force-sensitive refugees from across the Mid-Rim. His teachings would later influence several of Luke Skywalker's earliest Jedi students, though Zane himself died unrecognized, his grave hidden beneath a wildflower-covered knoll near Lake Sindar. Even in the world of invention, Corellia's true architects are often overshadowed by the brands they helped build. The revolutionary double-core reactor used in the YT-2400 line was not the work of CC's design team, but of a Dral apprentice named Gorleth Neem, whose unorthodox prototype was nearly rejected before being secretly installed in a test vessel by a sympathetic supervisor. The ship's unmatched performance forced the company to adopt the design, without ever crediting Gorleth. It wasn't until decades later that Holologs confirmed her contribution, prompting a grassroots movement to rename the model the Nim Core in her honor. What threads these lives together is not celebrity, but contribution. Corellia's greatest heroes are not defined by medals or monuments, but by the ripple effects of their decisions. Some are saboteurs who delayed a Star Destroyer's construction by weeks. Some are teachers who protected forbidden texts during the Jedi Purge. Some are laborers who refused to work double shifts during Imperial crackdowns, forcing an overseer to renegotiate terms. These are not the deeds that appear in galactic textbooks, but they are the ones remembered in Corellian bars, in family lore, and in the long memory of a people who do not forget those who stood tall when others knelt. At the heart of this cultural tapestry lies a singular truth: identity is resistance. To be Corellian is to constantly define oneself, not through allegiance, but through action. In a galaxy that demands conformity, Corellians offer variance. In a system that rewards obedience, they value clever subversion. Even in peace, Corellians remain vigilant, wary of creeping control, ever ready to challenge authority, not for the thrill, but for the principle. Their independence is not selfishness. It is a collective promise that no one, not even a government claiming to speak for justice, may rule without accountability. And yet, for all their rebellion, Corellians are not anarchists. They build, they collaborate, they teach and govern and heal. They do not reject structure. They demand that it earn its place. In that way, Corellia teaches the galaxy something it has too often forgotten: that resistance is not chaos, and that liberty is not disorder, that you can believe in community without surrendering your conscience, that freedom is not a thing to be granted, but a thing to be claimed, and then always defended. As the galaxy shifts once again, with old powers fading and new threats rising, the legacy of Corellia endures, not in the flags it flies or the weapons it builds, but in the attitude of its people. In the child who questions an unfair rule, in the engineer who redesigns a broken system instead of accepting its failure, in the pilot who flies not for the credits, but because she believes no one should tell her where she cannot go. This is Corellia, not a world, not a shipyard, not a rebellion, but an idea, one that flies on, stubborn and proud, across every star.